news that is talking about the recent news over the past year of local newspapers closing, particularly in the Southwest metro area. Woodbury lost its newspaper as well as Eden Prairie in April of 2020. Eden Prairie organized very quickly and put together Eden Prairie Local News. About a year and a half ago, Susan Kent and I became aware of Eden Prairie Local News and the work that they've done, and we said, why not in Woodbury? So with Eden Prairie Local News mentoring us, which was started by Jennifer Loon and Roy Terwilliger as two of the founding board members who are also former legislators, we went to work and reaching out to our community. In the meantime, Prior Lake lost its newspaper this last spring, a year ago spring, and Lori Hartman, who is on today, was very involved with that particular publication and has formed a community group. So all of us kind of found each other, and Eden Prairie Local News was certainly our mentor of telling us what we needed to do to start. And we came together and we found Charlie Weaver. Charlie is the executive director of the Minnesota Daily at the University of Minnesota. And he's been active over a number of years in college newspapers and local news, but he's also been working with the Ames community in starting up a local nonprofit newsroom there. And as we talked to him, it was like, we have started these three new newsrooms. And it's not like we're former journalists that have taken off, that have been laid off and started a newsroom. We are community members. And we needed some help, and particularly in the technical part, since this is going to be online. So together, the three of us on the three newsrooms applied to the McKnight Foundation for a grant to start the Metro Nonprofit News Network, which we'll be talking about today. And the purpose of that is really to help emerging startup newsrooms. We're sort of the initial group. We've already had conversations and helped Menominee, Wisconsin start. We've had conversations with Roseville, Chaska Chanhassen, Shakopee and Jordan, and others. So I'm going to let Charlie talk more about that. But we just hope that today we give you a glimpse of really the startup of how to start up a local nonprofit newsroom. We all are doing this in our own communities because the loss of engagement, the loss of local news, the way that rumors start and spin out of control on local media and social media. So how do we really focus on nonpartisan, fact-based news delivery? So Charlie, with that, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Kathy. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you today. And if you are eating, please eat. This is a lunch and learn, so we will just kind of roll through it in that regard. Yeah, so this is just going to be kind of a high-level discussion about kind of the formation of MNNN is our shorthand for it. And really talk about the value and impact of community news and its decline, but also now its resurgence, in my opinion. But we will get to that a little bit later. And then we will have kind of a Q&A session at the end too, so that if you have specific questions for the individual members that are on the call or myself, we'll be happy to answer those. But yeah, what we're going to be talking about is kind of a new model in the journalism world or ecosystem. And when I say new, it's not really new, it's more emerging, because the more research that we've all done as we've been pulling these projects together, we're bumping into other people in the wild that are doing these types of things. And so we feel like we're on the right path, a very public service oriented path that I think is going to eventually benefit journalism as a profession, but also our communities as they become more and more informed with fact-based, nonpartisan news. So I'm Charlie Weaver. I'm the executive director and co-publisher of the Minnesota Daily. Our organizational structure has three top individuals at our on our org chart that make up the office of the publisher, and that's part of our nonprofit mission. Is we want to make sure that there isn't a single individual that's making, specific decisions that impact the way that we interact with our communities. As Kathy mentioned, I've been in student media now for almost 23 years. 4 of those years was actually as an undergrad student at Iowa State University at the Greenlee School of Journalism. And then when I graduated, I walked into my general manager's office and said, I really like mentoring and teaching and doing this type of stuff. Is there any way that you could offer me a professional position to continue doing what I'm doing today? And she did. And my path from Iowa State took me to the University of Oregon, and I became the president and publisher of the Oregon Daily Emerald in 2014. And then in 2017, the position here at the Minnesota Daily opened up. So I came back to the Midwest because I am truly a Midwesterner. Once you get out to the West Coast, you kind of have that little crunch time where you figure out where your heart really lies. And mine is in cold weather and sun, not moderate temperatures and drizzle. Happy to be back here. And a lot of what we're doing with MNNN, kind of referring to what Kathy said, is taking a lot of the information and teachings that I've learned over the last 25 years. The student media space is very, very relevant to the small nonprofit community news space as we begin building it up, because there is a lot of teaching and mentoring involved in it, and creating structures that can be kind of bootstrapped so that you can get quicker to launch type scenarios going. So our agenda is going to be very simple, and it follows the journalism model. We're going to talk about the who, the what, the where, the when, the why, and the how. And then we'll roll into some questions. So the who, like Kathy was talking about, the catalyst, it was inspired by groups of involved community advocates around the metro area. And MNNN was born out of the collapse of the local news ecosystem in the metro area. We still have major news contributors like NPR, MinnPost, Star Tribune, different places like that, but they don't go to local areas or the smaller communities unless something significant is happening. And usually significant is a synonym for bad. And that really doesn't benefit the communities in any way, shape, or form, as far as being informed and engaged and learning about different things that are going on. So the network that we're building is designed to help develop and launch sustainable community newsrooms that offer more relevant and complete coverage for their readers. Basically, what we're trying to design here is a quick start guide to launching a community newsroom. These are the original, the 4 to the left are the original kind of founders of MNNN. Plus Greg Leeper, he is the Eden Prairie Community Foundation executive director. They were very gracious in being able to allow us to accept funds on behalf of the network, because the network itself isn't incorporated, but it's more of a collaborative learning lab that shares in resources and knowledge. So what? I want to talk about that in 3 parts. Our mission is dedicated to strengthening nonpartisan community-based journalism by supporting the creation of infrastructure and training to accelerate the founding and sustainability of community-owned nonprofit newsrooms in suburban areas across the Twin Cities and metro area. Our goal is to kind of polish the process and then expand it into greater Minnesota. So the mission will change as we evolve. And by fostering this collaboration, MNNN will provide shared services, mentorship, financial guidance, basically anything and everything that an organization needs to know to be able to pull a local news organization together. And our vision is always be a leading trusted source of local news and information that fosters a well-informed and engaged community. You're going to hear me, I'm going to sound like a broken record, because one of my big tenets for this project is stewardship. It's about community stewardship. It's about making our communities better than we found them. And I think a lot of that stewardship has been lost over the years with the decline of local news organizations. Our values are truth and trustworthiness, transparency, freedom of expression, innovation, and collaboration. But wholly at the end of the day, community ownership is key. We're not going to be owned by a corporate entity. This MMM isn't trying to incorporate to take over all of these networks. The whole goal of it is each community builds its own local news source that it owns and operates. So kind of an overview, all of the MMM nodes are independently incorporated. They all have their 501c3 status, so they are tax exempt. And they're all governed by local boards of directors. MMM has a project board, but we're not making any policy for the individual groups. The groups themselves govern themselves. Community stewardship, these newsrooms fill a void left behind by the shuttering of their local news sources. And a more informed community is a healthy community. And what we're trying to offer are digital ecosystems that provide paywall-free news with comprehensive local coverage. One of our other kind of guiding lights is that information needs to be free. You shouldn't have to pay for it. You need to be able to equitably distribute this information across your communities so that they can make informed decisions about living life in their spaces. And what we're trying to do is create a model for delivering critical support services to all partners. And what this means is it's kind of referring to what Kathy was talking about. We want to take out a lot of the questions that arise at the initial planning. We want to be able to provide like tech stacks, checklists, organizational documents that have kind of templated things that people can just use for themselves. Nothing is going to be copyrighted or proprietary in this regard. We are operating under an open source model where if somebody comes to us and is thinking about this, we'll engage with them and let them know and show them what we've been doing so that they can do it faster. Because not only are they learning from our successes, they're also learning from our failures. And I don't mean failures like catastrophic failures, but there are things that we're going to try that just don't work out. And it's better to involve all of that information when we're pulling these groups together. And then leverage our resources through shared investment and expense savings. Like there are different things that the network itself can kind of provide to the nodes under kind of a shared cost and operating budget banner. And what this does, it'll maximize all of our available resources and best practices amongst the network members. And we really do promote local collaboration and learning instead of franchising. So like, I want to make sure that that's wholly understood. Like you won't get voted out of the network or anything if you choose to do something differently than the network does. We're here as just a pool of resources, knowledge, and information that you can use and take from it what you will. Because in my research, I've traveled to a number of different kind of nonprofit news organizations throughout the I-35 corridor, we'll call it. So in Minnesota, Iowa, and Nebraska. And I had a good conversation with the Nebraska Journalism Trust founders. And basically one of their tenants, and they said that they stole it from somebody else. So I don't know where the attribution lies, but if you've seen one nonprofit newsroom, you've seen one nonprofit newsroom. We understand that there isn't a one size fits all solution, but the solution that we think is the best solution is being able to have access to the people that are doing what you're doing and being able to ask questions of them and connect with them on a regular basis and have shared documentation and learning resources. And so the where is MMM right now? Currently, we're the three newspapers that Kathy outlined at the very beginning: Eden Prairie Local News, Prior Lake News Compass, and Woodbury News Net. We have, and all of them have some pretty significant street cred, in my opinion. Eden Prairie is entering its 5th year of operations and continues to expand its paid staff. They're always on the forefront looking for different grant opportunities and revenue solutions. Prior Lake News Compass, out of our group, was the quickest to come to launch. They were able to launch in under 4 months. And I think a lot of that, and I don't want to speak for Lori, but was due to the hard work and passion of its volunteers. But I think it was also due to the having the network to kind of build off of. Talk to Steve, talk to Kathy and Susan about like their trials, tribulations, successes, and failures. And Woodbury News Net. They launched their newsletter and their website shortly right after that 6 months ago. And they're, I believe, celebrating your 1 year anniversary in February from getting the group together and actually starting this project. So we're doing a lot of really good work in that regard, where we're bringing local newsrooms back online. We're working through the business models and different things along those lines with each individual group, tailored to their communities. And then the when is, when do we plan to expand? I'm trying to anticipate some of the questions. Our plan is to bring on another 3 newsrooms by the end of 2026. We're already kind of ahead of that schedule because we are Carver County Local News in the South Metro is going to be joining our network next month. And we actually have, like I said earlier, as we're doing our research and work, we're bumping into more and more groups that have this idea and whatnot. So we actually have a pretty long prospect list of 4 or 5 organizations that are thinking about doing this in the near future. So I think we're going to absolutely be able to hit our goal before the end of 2026 in that regard. And the why. This is the existential part of the conversation. Journalism is in decline, and I've always hesitated to put this slide in there because I personally don't believe that. It is a fact that local news has been on the decline. And I think a lot of that has to do with philosophy. It has to do with the way that the businesses are being run and managed. I think it has to do with the fact that there aren't local operators really doing that type of work anymore. Like, you have corporate ownership, you have hedge fund ownership, you have private billionaires and different individuals like that that own it. But there are no, like, well, there are still family-owned newspapers out there, but the succession planning, even for the family-owned newspapers, is questionable moving into the future. And so I think the more we work on a model that is sustainable and convertible, we even open up some opportunities, say for a longtime family-owned newspaper that doesn't have an heir to pass it off to. Instead of trying to find a buyer for it, we can work with that community to figure out how to take over the family-owned newspaper and turn it into a community-owned news co-op or nonprofit. So headlines from across the country show a continued decline of local news coverage. And it's not just happening with newspapers, but we've got radio stations, television stations, just anything that falls under the air quotes mainstream media banner is at risk. And I think the decline of nonpartisan fact-based reporting in a local ecosystem is kind of pointing to some of the hyperpolarism that you're seeing in our country at this point. And it's harder to really yell at your neighbor who you know is the news editor or the reporter or somebody like that. It's a lot easier to just, throw fire at a news organization that operates at the national level, that is covering big national topics, but isn't covering the local Little League teams, the ice hockey teams, the school board, the city council, different things like that. The work that we're doing is trying to create more of a middle out expansion of informed citizenry. And nonprofits work. And a lot of times when we get into community meetings that all of these organizations have hosted, there are some naysayers in the room, and they question well, why are you trying to not be profitable? And the misnomer there is nonprofit doesn't mean unprofitable. It just means that any profit that you do make needs to be reinvested into the organization, the business, which I think is a more healthy way to approach a local news economy than having private ownership. there are no personal biases or bottom lines that have to be afforded to an individual. It's about the health of the community. It's about the success of the local businesses. It's about the success of the readers that participate in your products. And so two of the kind of banners here, the Minnesota Daily and the Iowa State Daily, both of those are student newspapers, and both of those student newspapers have been nonprofit entities for almost 50 years now. And we are running very, well, I won't say very profitable. We are running a sustainable newsroom. I'm going to leave it at that. And the Texas Tribune is doing quite well. Flatwater Free Press, which is the newsroom founded by the Nebraska Journalism Trust, is doing quite well. The Salt Lake Tribune, 3 years ago now, I believe, converted to a nonprofit model and is thriving. So there are really good examples out there. Like I said before, not everything is a one size fits all or a copy and paste solution, but the goal is for us to constantly also be researching what is working and what's not working outside of our own network so that we can be bringing that information back to the group. Our goal is community stewardship. We want to create relevant and engaging news for our communities. We want to provide an environment for respectful discussion and intelligent debate. We want to serve as watchdogs for our community because that's going to help our communities be healthier. We want to also act as a conduit that brings cities that we operate in together. As we've seen in the suburbs and the expansion of the suburbs, you know, those communities are becoming more and more diverse, and we want to make sure that the local news sources that operate within them bring all of those different varied personalities and communities in those cities or metro areas together. We want to innovate. We want to create this open source model for other local news organizations to follow. We're not hedging anything. We're not protecting anything. We're not trying to keep our ideas to ourselves or anything like that. I really do think that we are going to be a lot more successful than privately owned media moving forward because our model is more collaborative. Like Woodbury is not in competition with Prior Lake or Eden Prairie or anything like that. Like they're representing their communities. They're not trying to get out over their skis. They're not trying to grow into a media monopoly or conglomerate or anything like that. They're just there to take care of their communities. And the how. So in two parts, how does this get done? It gets done with money and people. And addressing the nonprofit structure of it all, I actually leapfrogged ahead. So we've already covered this slide. Nonprofits is a good thing because we're investing all of our revenue opportunities back into the businesses. But how are we gonna try and cover the cost of these operations and make these things sustainable? There are three primary revenue sources that we've all discussed and talked about, and I think we've all agreed that are going to be foundational across any sort of nonprofit newsroom, regardless of the city or community that you live in. And that's sustaining donors. And what we're talking about there is smaller dollar donations that replace the print subscription revenue that print newspapers used to have to kind of pull in to help subsidize the printing and distribution of the print products. The beauty of what we're doing and the platforms that we're working on is the overhead margins have almost flipped. It's very inexpensive to manage a website and a weekly, twice weekly, 3 times a weekly, or daily newsletter than it is to print a newspaper, find people to take it out to other people's homes, and then do all of those collections. The small dollar donations, like I said, will replace the subscription revenue. Development, which we're talking about, is fundraising, grants, tax deductible sponsorships made by businesses and foundations in the area. The other thing that we're finding too, and I had a good conversation with the Ames folks last night about this, is if you come at it from a journalist's perspective, and you only think that you can go after journalism donations and dollars and different things like that, that tends to be a little bit more of a kind of a shark pool. But if you look left or right, there are a lot of community organizations out there and foundations and volunteer support groups that are really chomping at the bit to get a centralized news and information distribution mechanism set back up in their communities. Some of the surveying that we've done through AIMS, through MNNN, we've talked to small business owners, and they want this just as much as readers want this. The dependence on social media, the dependence on the internet is kind of peaked and is now kind of also on the decline as far as engagement goes. And then advertising. All nonprofit entities can sell advertising, and the idea there is that we're going to work together as a network to develop different products, services, and opportunities that our community will benefit from, and we can turn around and monetize those just like we monetized ads in the print editions. And quite honestly, like one of my new mantras, working even with my students here, what's old is new again. We just are repackaging it in a digital format. So we've talked relentlessly about different, not only news products, but like public service products. Like there's no reason that small community newsrooms can't, or excuse me, not newsrooms, small community news organizations, the business and marketing side of those organizations can't develop something like a business directory or a shopper or something like that that also goes out weekly to the audiences. But the people are also the second half of this equation, and MNNN, along with the individual news nodes, need to create advocates and outside support mechanisms in their communities. We need cheerleaders. We need people to help us get the word out. The network benefits from meetings like this. Like anytime we can get in front of a group of people to talk about what we're doing and how we're doing it, we will take it. The emerging digital-only news space not only needs community support, but it also needs corporate and legislative support to thrive. And what do I mean by legislative support? I'm kind of tailoring the end slide to this group, but like what we're talking about is just some different policies and help that nonprofit. We're not looking for a handout. We're just looking to kind of even the playing field. There's a lot of policy that's in place right now relative to print only news organizations. We're looking to just kind of be able to have a seat at the table and have some different expansive conversations to make sure that we're getting an equitable voice to kind of advocate for ourselves and the operations that we're doing. And there has already been some work started by Senator Marty and his team, and a lot of the MNNN members, as well as the Minnesota Newspaper Association. I forget what the name of the radio association is, but like we're all looking for different ways to help sustain journalism as a whole. And I think there are a lot of really good ideas and opportunities that are happening in other states, other areas that we can kind of utilize and take inspiration from. But the whole goal here is to make all of these newsrooms sustainable well into the future. So that's kind of the spiel that I have right now. Does anybody have any direct questions, or you can drop a question in the chat, or Kathy, you're on mute.
Charlie, can you talk a little bit how we discussed sharing platforms? You sort of referenced that, but that was one of the things that really in Woodbury we were stuck on. It was like, what kind of website? And I think give the example of Snow Sites that it's used by many college newspapers, started with local high schools to college, and now they're looking at local newspapers. And you did reference that and how newsletters are a way to build subscriptions to lead to websites, because we were also stuck on, if we're going to have a website, we've got to have all this content, whereas we started with newsletters to build the website, because I think that's startup.
Yeah, so what Kathy's talking about is we're developing as we go along kind of a tech stack recommendation. Like I said, it's not a requirement to be a part of the network, but it is a recommendation. And a lot of that is the more similar platforms that we're all using, that shared learning can happen more frictionlessly. And so like the network has landed on a vendor. It's a local vendor out of Burnsville, Snow Sites, is stands for Student News Online. That was their kind of origin story. It was a group of high school newsroom advisors that thought that they could build a better website. And in the God, I think they've been around for more than a decade now. In that time, they, like Kathy said, they've expanded into from high school to college. And I just had a conference call with the founders 2 weeks ago to talk about the expansion into the community news market, because we've been giving them a lot of referrals based off of the newsrooms that we're working with, but even like Menominee is being part of that. And the other thing too is the newsletter platform. The newsletter ecosystem is kind of the new newspaper, or I'm kind of modifying the way that I'm describing that. It's the new front page of your newspaper. The website is the rest of your newspaper. And so, and the nice thing about that is that's kind of cross spectrum as far as ages go. The newsletter ecosystem is very much participated in by my demographic here, the students at the university and younger students kind of coming up into the world. Like they don't have a problem subscribing to something like that. And I think a lot of our subscribers that we currently have throughout the network are all elder subscribers, and making that transition, I believe, has been relatively easy for that community. And so much so that there were a couple of stats that we were looking at the other day where I was really impressed by just the number of people in the MNNN network that are reading their newsletters on their mobile devices is staggering, in my opinion. I guess my implicit bias was anybody over my age is looking at this stuff on a computer, but that's not the case. And so I think that shows another kind of glimpse into sustainability. Like a lot of us were really concerned, like, well, will our readership want to make the pivot from print to a digital platform? And quite honestly, like they leapfrogged over where I thought they were going to go, to a different platform entirely that's also being heavily engaged with by the youth markets.
So Charlie, could you take down the PowerPoint so everyone?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Sorry. Boop. Gene.
Yeah, I want to agree with you, Charlie, on one of your premises, and that is that journalism is in and has been for a couple of decades now, or a little bit longer, in serious decline.
Mm-hmm.
And I attribute it to the internet and social media. But I want to challenge you on a couple of things.
Sure.
One, early in your presentation, you seem to be describing all of the suburban metropolitan area as homogeneous, community news deserts. And that's not the case. I just sent in a check for a subscription for my community newspaper in the last couple of weeks. So, but it sounded like you didn't even acknowledge that there are viable, it's a mere shadow of its former self, I will admit, but I don't think it's going to be helped by the alternative you described. So I believe that where there is a need, what you're describing is fine and appropriate, but it's not going to help to have the competition where there isn't a need.
Well, in a community that has a situation like you're talking about, there isn't a need in that community. But what we're talking,
acknowledge it. You didn't recognize it.
Okay. But those are the groups that aren't looking for help either. And so like our responsibility, I think, is more to the areas that have lost their news organizations, or and you just said it yourself, the news organization that you sent your subscription to is in decline, or it's a shadow of its former self. I don't know if it's actually in decline or not, but what we can offer at the point of, if it does have the risk of going away, like, we have a number of different, because, like, let me back this up just a little bit to your point about just the decline over the last 20 years. Everybody wants to blame the decline on the internet and social media and different things like that. I'm going to respectfully push back on you. It wasn't that the internet showed up. It was the operators chose not to engage with the internet in a productive way. Like, because I was there when all of that was happening 20 years ago, and a lot of publishers and editors fought the internet as hard as they could. They didn't want it. They wanted to maintain their print distributions, and so they were fighting disruption instead of taking a step back, looking at that disruption and how they could incorporate the internet into their workflows and their businesses. And by the time that we decided to do that, we had lost classifieds, we had lost autos, we had lost real estate. And so, like, we've been playing catch up for the last 20 years as news media. And it quite literally took a pandemic for a lot of organizations to understand the value in digital, the value in being able to, like, everybody in the community has a device in their hand. How are we working to leverage that infrastructure to make our communities a little bit more engaged? So, like, and I agree, like, there are newspapers out there that are still printing and publishing, but if they would participate in some of the conversations that we're having too, they might find some more profitable ways to operate their business. And our goal isn't to, like, go out and be a consultancy for all of the current media operators out there. We're here to support the people that have lost or are on the precipice of losing their media organizations.
Let me just, one other point that you made very emphatically is that nonprofits work. I would amend that by saying sometimes.
Mhm.
I think that if there's any group of people that understand that nonprofits can fail miserably, it's people that have been reading the newspapers or serving in the legislature in the last few years.
Okay, yeah, that's a good point. So, I mean, I can amend that to nonprofit newsrooms run as a true business do work. I'm more than willing to amend that statement. Yeah.
Okay, carried.
Any other questions?
So Jean, let me just say that we in Woodbury, at one point, we were having our initial conversations with our community. We spent 6 months trying to find people from all different groups. Susan and I both have had DFL after our name, so we really wanted this to be nonpartisan. We reached out to Republicans in our community to make sure they were at the table. And somebody asked the question, why aren't we doing a for-profit? Why aren't we finding, well, then it's a business, and the business model has failed here, has not worked. The other issue is that as a community-owned nonprofit, it's community-owned, community-led. It's not like you have a publisher who says, well, we're not going to cover that, or we're going to endorse candidates. We're not endorsing candidates. We will provide information, but you're not going to see a nonprofit going out and making political statements and endorsements. So that was something that was appealing to us. And the fact that this was all started all volunteer. We have our first employee, Matt is on the call somewhere. I know he's in darkness, but we have our first part-time editor starting. Up until now, this has been all volunteers. And that's not a business model. And that's why we're looking at sustainability. That's where MNNN is really committed to how do we make these nonprofits sustainable. That's absolutely key to us. We can't be all volunteer for years and years to get us started, but over time, we need to build our professional staff.
And to kind of call back to one of Mindy's questions too about small dollar donations, what we're talking about in that regard is kind of a projected business model. I've been working with Jonathan at Institute for Nonprofit News, and we're talking about like, what is the sustainability metric as far as active readership goes for these organizations? And I think the goal is to at least get 10% of your community populations to be able to subscribe to your newsletter, which is completely free. But then you want to convert a quarter of that readership into your small dollar subscribing donors. And that's the base level. So like what we're talking about is like $10 a month. So a community like Woodbury at about 75,000 populace, if we can get 7,500 people subscribing to the newsletter and do a quarter, if not a third conversion to the paid subscribers, that's 2,500 people that we're looking toward in a community of 75,000 to pay $120 a year. That's $300,000 annually that can be invested into the operations of the organization. And that's just the subscription. Now, let me talk to you a little bit about the cost. Beehive itself won't be more than $7,000 for an audience of that size annually. So the profit margin on just the subscriber base alone is pretty substantive. And that doesn't include any of the grant seeking, the community sponsorships that we're going out and looking for and pulling together packages for and sharing those resources across the network. And then advertising itself, just with the newsletter alone, based on 6 advertising spots available in a weekly newsletter, that's another, I forget what the number is, based on the pricing that everybody else has, because pricing is going to fluctuate between communities too and populations, because it's all based off of kind of readership. So we're just not offering CPM pricing or the pennies on the dollar pricing like Google was, because those aren't effective.
Charlie, I just wanted to chime in real quickly. The other thing that we know is that local businesses really, because we lost our paper for 4 years and we really felt that loss. And so, you know, this is the best way we can have come across working with community members to replace that sense of connection and that information. I always point out that in Woodbury, we know way more about what's going on in the Minneapolis City Council than we do in Woodbury's. And we're the 8th largest city in the state. And so, but recognizing that there is an actual need with local businesses to be able to reach the members of the local community with their message and their story and their sales and promotions. It's not just a source of revenue for the news organization. It's also a real local community service. And I also, Charlie, before we move on, I wanted to make sure you saw that Mindy has her hand up with another question.
Yep, I was just going to ask on her next. Mindy?
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you for having this program. Thanks for those of you who have helped a bit in Roseville. We have a group that I'm not a part of that's been working on it, but we've had a couple local meetings on the League of Women Voters, and you know, talking about, one was about the hedge fund that's taken over so many papers, that it wasn't the internet that destroyed the papers. It was a conscious movement to have them be investments and then drain them and then sell them and so forth. So that's something to be aware of. In Roseville area, we've had at one time 3 local papers. One was online and the other 2 were papers. And now we have nothing. So we'd love to be your community, Jean, where you have a paper left where we would work to keep it going, because that would be easier than starting from scratch. But we do have, and here's my question. I have 2 questions. One, I wonder if we could hear from John Marty to hear what he is doing in the legislature. And then 2, this for Charlie, in your presentation, you said that it would not be a good idea to have one person doing it, that it should be this community group. We do have in Roseville one person doing something now, and she's doing a pretty good job, being that she is one person. She asked for funds and, Roger and I sent her a typical small donation.
Mhm.
And she's providing news that we're not otherwise getting, but she is one person. So what to do about that, or just keep working and work alongside her, or what?
So I believe in free market. So like if an individual sees a gap in a community or a void in a community, that's their right to like launch something like this. I would include her in the conversation because Kathy and I were talking about this the other day. We are reaching out to the Roseville group because I came and spoke to the League of Women Voters in Roseville, and they had had the percolations and the conversations of all of this, but they hadn't really kind of done anything significantly. We're to a point with MNNN where we're looking for some of those other prospect newsrooms or projects that we can help assist and take on. But yeah, my like, you don't want to really run that person out of business. I would work with them to see if they could help with the project itself and find a position for them in the future if your group is serious about launching a nonprofit newsroom. One of the other things and specifically to that I wanted to talk about is like the other passion I have coming from student media is like my graduates leave the state because there is a lack of journalism opportunities in the state. There are only so many journalism jobs. And I had a meeting with Alicia Cohen, the director of the Hubbard School, a month ago, and specifically asked that question too. Like, if we can start bringing more local newsrooms back online, what are you going to do to encourage or inspire your students to actively go work in a small community newsroom? Because right now they all want to go work at the Star Tribune, the New York Times, the Washington Post, different things along those lines. And we talked significantly about working in a local newsroom gives you a lot more experience faster. You're going to be kind of pushing up through the ranks at a larger news organization. If you're in a small community news organization, you're going to have to take some photos. You're going to have to help edit other stories. You're going to have to write and report, and you're going to have to empty the trash. Like, you're going to get a more comprehensive news experience. And quite honestly, this generation is all predicated on the impact that they have for their communities. They're going to get a bigger sense of satisfaction by helping empower a local community than just kind of writing liners for a larger organization where there's a hierarchy in place that they're not going to get the big juicy stories or anything right when they first step through the door. And I think encouraging more students to go local through other national support organizations like Report for America. Report for America has changed some of their placement policies. They're not placing journalists in corporate owned or hedge fund newsrooms. It's all local or private owned newsrooms. And I think we can help expand that initiative and keep more students and younger journalists in the state.
So Chancellor Olson, that was for you to talk about how we could potentially help in training journalism students for this new digital age. And I don't want to forget about Senator Marty sharing some of his thoughts too. Senator Marty. Oh, yeah.
Let's hear from Senator Marty, I think, but I would just quickly say, I think if you looked at the journalism programs that exist in Minnesota State, they're really doing what Charlie's talking about, which is, you have to be a Jane or a jack of all trades, a utility, yep, Swiss Army knife type of journalist.
I'll speak up quickly. I see Susan's got her hand up too. And just to say that, one, I was glad to hear the MLS is hosting this event because I think it's a really urgent topic. And in the fear I have of what's happening to our democracy, big part of it is the fact that there's no way people get news that's trustworthy and reliable. And I understand, and I really, really appreciate, and the reason I got involved in this is partly from League of Women Voters folks and partly from the local news, the nonprofit things in Woodbury and Shakopee and Prior Lake and so on. Eden Prairie, excuse me. And Charlie, your work, and it's all very helpful and so on. And I also have been reached out to, because I mean, my concern is not only the quote replacement for what we're losing, but also what Gene, you mentioned about existing things, and met with Ampers, the nonprofit radio folks other than NPR, and the Broadcasters and Newspaper Association, because I think want to make sure that we strengthen what we have and we replace what we're losing and so on. And after a number of meetings with a lot of people, I reached out to McKnight and Minnesota Council on Foundations and May Yang, asking if they would, if Press Forward Minnesota or somebody would try and convene not just the nonprofit folks trying to do the startup and trying to make this new infrastructure happen, but also the existing ones to try and help them. Everybody's got different interests, but the broadcasters were very interested in working with nonprofits, newspapers interested in working with broadcasters and nonprofits and everything else. And May Yang did respond to that in early January. I think many of you were copied on that McKnight and Press Forward Minnesota is willing to do convening of this group, because I think we all have slightly, or a lot of people have slightly different projects and different interests, but a lot of overlap too. And the overall thing we need, the Jefferson comment about if you had a choice between having a solid government and a solid media infrastructure, he said he would prefer to have the media infrastructure, because without news, we can't have the democracy. So May said that Press Forward Minnesota does not have the internal capacity, so they would likely hire a consultant to help pull people together. And so we're waiting to hear next steps, but I do hope we can bring the folks who are doing the nonprofit thing, which is where I first got involved in it, and also the existing ones, and see it not as, Gene, your point about competing with them. We don't want to undercut existing things by competition, but I think these otherwise, quote, competing businesses and nonprofits, I think they all see, I've been surprised how much they see each other more as allies in a very tough time than they've seen the conflict. So I'm looking forward to that. I wish I had more capacity to put more time and effort into this, but I'm kind of hoping that task force and others can suggest ways that legislatively and policy-wise and maybe financially we can have some ability to help in that. And I will point out that one final comment is that the U.S. from the beginning has recognized the need to invest in media. The post office, when it first came into being, 45+% of the mail was periodicals, and that was bringing like 8% or 9% of the revenue for the post office, because the federal government recognized we need to have news sources out there. So anyhow, that's my comments. I'm basically participating here today just to hear what everybody's saying, and it's very helpful and encouraging. So keep up what you're doing.
And thank you, Senator Marty, and thank you so much for your leadership in this conversation and helping it really, I think, begin to get some momentum. And that brings me to sort of what I was going to say, which responds to both what Mindy said and what Gene were talking about. I think we all need to think about the sustainability of what we're doing. Because I know the work that Kathy and I and others in our community have put into this, and it's the same, everywhere else this happens. You don't want it to last for a year and then go away. And we don't want it to become something that some, hedge fund thinks looks like a profitable investment, and then they buy it and gut it, and then it goes away and somebody else is starting from scratch again. I think sustainability is also an issue with the scenario of the one-person newsroom. Yes, one person can do a really good job, but when life circumstances take them away from doing that anymore, what's left? So when we convened our community of people, and we were very intentional about bringing people from all aspects of Woodbury and hearing their thoughts and having them be a part of the conversation on what we were trying to build, that that collective thing where we are all focused on the whole community and something lasting that will serve the whole community. And I know from conversations with Lori and Steve from Prior Lake and Eden Prairie that they're thinking the same way. That's what makes this really meaningful. And from a policy perspective, and I'm pretty sure Senator Marty and Kathy and other legislators here, former legislators, will agree, these things don't happen overnight. We want to build a sustainable policy framework so that we can have healthy, reliable, local, fact-based news in our communities, whether it's city, suburb, or in communities around greater Minnesota.
So Charlie, if people want more information, or I think what we wanted to leave you with was, if there are efforts in your community and people are talking about this, it's sort of like, where can we go? And that was where we struggled, and we had Eden Prairie and Steve Shuey, who's on the call. Steve, wave your hand. He is the CEO of the Eden Prairie local news. And they, like I said, have been operating, but they were so generous in providing us with feedback and forms and things. That's what I think MNNN is all about, is how do we really make it easier for other groups who want to at least explore this. We've heard of a couple other communities where people are talking about this, and how could we help them get through some of the questions and issues that we have and say, here's what worked for us, here's what we're doing. There's other organizations, the Independent News Network, the nonprofit, INN, Independent Nonprofit News. And there's other groups that are there to help, Tiny News Collective that we're involved with. So Charlie, do you want to sort of leave us with what people might do if they're interested in just having that conversation or learning?
Just to answer Senator Marty's question, I will be sharing the PowerPoint with the group. I dropped my email into the chat, so if you have any additional questions or have questions about MNNN specifically, or you have groups of people that are working on these types of projects, please send them my way. And because part of what MNNN is also doing is we're planning on the second half of our first year launching kind of an Ask Me Anything webinar type series once a month, that you don't have to be a nonprofit news outlet. You can just be a concerned citizen or a media operator in your own communities. Come and talk to us. Let's chat about it. Like I said, we're not trying to hide any of this. And but we're also, like I said, not on a path to just take over the entire state with a bunch of nonprofit newsrooms either. We're just looking to fill the needs as they arise, or help other business owners find other products, services, workflows that will benefit their organization too. There's nothing secret in our sauce about what we're doing. And if they want to see it from the kind of inside, they can subscribe to our newsletters and see it happen in real time. But yeah, I would say just email me and we will continue the conversation, and just look for our announcements when we're doing these types of webinars and get-togethers and stuff. And yeah.
Rick.
Yeah, Kathy, yeah, it would be hard to imagine how a democracy would work without news sources that can give you legitimate news. It's just impossible to imagine. I'm going to go off on a little bit of a tangent here. In addition to that, we want people to know how the process works. And that's the model legislature program, which has been, for people who haven't had an opportunity to watch what's going on, with the help of a lot of people, quite frankly, including Scott Olson, who's here today, as the head of Minnesota State. We've been able to expand the Winona project out of Winona into the Twin Cities, and it's a big deal. And they did it at the Capitol, and it worked great. The other thing I want to say is I want to get a plug in for our next event, which is February 5th, and you can go online at the Minnesota Legislative Society. And it is Mallory Wigman, who is she's a Paralympian, probably the most decorated athlete in Minnesota at this point in time. She at various times has set and reset over 40 US and world records. She's medaled in the last 4 Paralympics, and she's going to try to get into the Los Angeles one. And she has a movie out called Watershed about that journey, but it takes an interesting twist, and it's about the infertility within the family. And it's the infertility, and she's deathly afraid of needles, and she has to give herself over 100 injections for IVF. So I'd encourage you to go to MinnesotaLegislativeSociety.org and sign up for that on the 5th of February.
And it's in Woodbury at the Woodbury 10 Theater. And I've talked to Margaret that may be something that we can put into the Woodbury Newsnet if local residents are interested in attending it. It's a sort of a first run, we're really, it's sort of not a world premiere, but we're pretty excited about Rick's work to make this happen.
And Mallory will be there, by the way. I forgot to mention that. That's important. And she is I've heard lots of inspirational speakers through the years. She is the most inspirational speaker I've ever heard anywhere, anytime, period.
I'm normally an optimist, but I have to say, Charlie, you got your work cut out for you. You talked about Prior Lake. Not only in Scott County, not only has the Prior Lake paper folded, but the Jordan paper, the Belle Plaine paper, and the Shakopee paper. The New Prague one is the only newspaper left in the county.
Mm-hmm.
I'm currently down here on the Gulf Coast digging out of snow, just west of Mobile, Alabama. But Mobile, Alabama, population over 182,000 people. That newspaper folded 2 years ago. There is nothing. On the local TV stations have their, 5 and 6 o'clock news. There are no newspapers down here other than, some advertising shoppers.
Mm-hmm.
Just one bright spot, and I don't know how this could tie in, but we do have a local radio station that on a regular basis, they bring in the mayors of the surrounding towns. Like the Monday is the mayor day. The mayors come in for a half hour and they talk about what's happening. And if they can't make it, the city administrator comes in. On Fridays, it's the superintendent of the schools come in. They have the activities directors come in, but at least they're making an effort to get some information about what's going on in local government to folks. And I think actually those programs are pretty popular. Now, Woodbury doesn't have a radio station or, but that's maybe some way. I'm not into podcasting or any of that, but to tie in an oral version of what you're doing might be something worth considering.
Well, and one of the conversations we're having or beginning to have with our network is how can we utilize AI in an ethical kind of enhanced way for our operations? And one of those things is AI is an excellent reader for all of the articles and different things like that. And so it can help you create accessible ways for your community to engage with it. The other thing that Carver County just recently did is they added an AI translator to their website. So any of their community members can now read their website in their native language. And so and that's what the network is all about, is finding solutions, finding innovations, finding opportunities to be as engaging as possible. And we don't have all of the answers, but we're finding the answers as quickly, or we're experimenting, we're iterating, we're doing a number of different things. But to your point, I truly believe journalism needs to be platform agnostic. So we have to get our information out into the ways that people want to receive it. So to your point, if it's in an audio format, we need to be thinking about it in that way. If it's written, we obviously are going to be able, that's the easiest lift for us, is the written. That's what we're used to. But video is also a huge component in the youth market. And having those different types of ways that we connect and communicate with our audience in our cities is going to be at the top of our priority list, is to finding the easy solutions and the training mechanisms and the shared services for all of that.
Mr. Banasek, I used to work for the company that had the Jordan Independent and Shakopee Valley News and Prior Lake American also. We have had conversations with the people who are trying to start something up in Shakopee and Jordan also, and also we're working with the Carver County folks as well. You're very lucky to have the New Prague Times, which is still family owned and has been for a long time, and they do a great job in servicing their community. And I will tell you that since we began our process 4 months ago, the reception from the Prior Lake community has been overwhelmingly positive. In a very short time, we have 1,000 people who have signed up for our newsletter and so forth. And I think communities are very appreciative if they have lost their community newspaper, and they will support our efforts going forward, whether it be through advertising from the business community or from small donations coming from readers. Honestly, it has been overwhelmingly positive, and we get calls, we get notes all the time from people who reach out to us saying, thank you for at least doing something to try and get local news back into our communities.
Yeah, and you know, and my sense is people are actually more interested in what's going on locally with their city council and their school board than they are with what's going on in St. Paul and Washington, and probably for good reason. But so they're looking, I think there's a market, and the trick obviously is how do you get people where they're at? And
I think it was a wake-up call for our communities too during the election period. So many people said to me, I don't know who's running. I don't know what the issues are. I did have one person who Prior Lake had a big school referendum and it did not pass. And it wasn't even a close margin, but they also said that there was less information out there in terms of what the referendum was needed for, and they attributed part of the loss because of it.
And I got a couple of notes. Some of you can't download the PDF from the chat that I dropped in there, but I am going to send it to Margaret to just distribute to the group via email as well. So if you can grab it from the chat, feel free. If you can't, it's going to be on its way.
I have to sign off. Thanks very much for inviting me today, and I wish you guys the best of luck in starting up newsrooms similar to the ones that we are trying to sustain through MNNN.
so one last question. Charlie, are you any relation to Charlie Weaver?
I don't believe so. I get that question quite a bit. I even had my students asking me why I was writing opinion columns in the Star Tribune when I first got here. And I'm just like, I'm not that Charlie.
Yeah, every time we talk about Charlie to somebody who has any connection with the legislature, it's like different Charlie Weaver.
That's all right.
Well, thank you, everyone. This has been a great discussion. I want to thank Charlie for presenting, and so many of you, if you hear of any issues, keep us posted. You know, we're all trying to get our own newsrooms up and running, but we absolutely want to pay it forward in terms of we were helped. How do we help others? And Steve Shuey, who just left, has been incredibly helpful to all of us. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank Thanks,
Right.
everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.